My stepmom left my dad after I refused to let her walk me down the aisle, and now he has a shocking confession before my wedding. I'm Lily, a 28-year-old woman who will marry her fiancé, Richard, a 30-year-old man, in 3 months. To comprehend my current circumstances, I must return to my childhood. My parents, Claire, 53F, and Tom, 55M, met at college and married young. They had me when they were both 25, and for the first 10 years of my existence, we seemed like the ideal family. I remember spending weekends at my grandparents' lake house, where Dad taught me how to fish while Mom made lunches. Every Friday, we had family game night, and my parents took turns reading me bedtime stories. It wasn't perfect, they argued like any couple, but I always felt loved and secure. Everything changed when I was 10. Dad began working late more frequently, and Mom appeared increasingly tense and sad. I overheard arguments about someone named Tanya, but I had no idea what was going on. Then, one day, I returned home from school to find Mom crying in the kitchen. She sat me down and told me that Dad had an affair with his coworker, Tanya, 48F, and they were getting divorced. The following few months were a jumble of tears, conflicts, and bewilderment. Dad moved out, and I remember being furious with him for hurting Mom and splitting up our family. The divorce was messy and traumatic. There were intense debates over custody and property partition. I recall sitting outside the courtroom during one of their sessions, feeling disoriented and terrified. In the end, Mom received primary custody, with Dad receiving visits every other weekend. At first, I was hesitant to spend time with Dad. I was angry and sad, and I did not want to leave Mom alone. Mom, despite her own anguish, pushed me to give Dad another chance. She informed me, "Your father made a mistake, but he still loves you. It's fine to adore him too." Gradually, I began to like spending weekends with Dad. He'd take me to the movies, show me how to cook, badly, and we'd have lengthy discussions about school and my friends. Things became more problematic when Dad declared, 2 years after the divorce, that he was marrying Tanya. Tanya and I met for the first time at a dinner Dad had arranged. She appeared pleasant enough, bringing me a gift, a diary with my name embossed on it, and inquiring about my interests. But I couldn't get rid of the idea that she was the reason my family had come apart. Tanya worked hard to establish a bond with me. After Dad and Tanya married, she was constantly buying me gifts, clothes, books, art supplies, and recommending mother-daughter activities such as spa days or cooking classes. However, her efforts felt forced to me, and I was never comfortable around her. Part of it was out of loyalty to my mother, and part of it was because Tanya appeared to be attempting to replace her. As I approached adolescence, my connection with Dad and Tanya deteriorated. They would frequently make disparaging remarks about Mom, such as, "It's a shame your mother is so bitter," or, "If only your mother could move on like we have." These statements bothered me because I understood how hard Mom worked to co-parent harmoniously. My mother, on the other hand, never spoke negatively about Dad or Tanya in front of me. She listened to my complaints but always pushed me to give them another shot. "They're not perfect," she'd continue, "but they try. It's acceptable to have many relationships with different people in your life." Tanya became pregnant when I was 16 years old. Dad was overjoyed, continually mentioning how happy he was to have a real family now. Those words struck deep because they made me feel like I wasn't enough for him, like I was a relic of his past rather than an important part of his new existence. Tanya had a miscarriage at 20 weeks. It was a tough time for them, and I recall feeling a combination of anguish for their loss and guilty relief that I would not be replaced by a new baby. Dad informed me that Tanya would require additional love and support from me, which put a lot of strain on me at a time when I was already dealing with usual teenage concerns and the lingering consequences from the divorce. Tanya's attachment to me grew stronger following the miscarriage. She began introducing me to everyone as her daughter, which made me very uncomfortable. She also started urging me to call her Mom, something I flatly refused to do. This resulted in several arguments, with Dad always siding with Tanya and accusing me of being insensitive to her feelings. During this time, my relationship with my mother remained solid. She was my rock, always willing to listen without judgment and provide support without pressuring. She encouraged me to pursue my interests, which led to me joining the school newspaper and later studying journalism in college. I met Richard in college. We were both writing for the campus paper and bonded over our shared interest in investigative reporting. Richard's family was much easier than mine. His parents were still happily married, and he had 2 younger siblings. I was initially cautious to let him inside my delicate family relationships, but his tolerance and understanding allowed me to open up. All of these previous concerns have finally come to a head as we prepare for our wedding. I have chosen to ask my mother to walk me down the aisle. She's been my steadfast supporter, role model, and greatest friend. When I told Dad and Tanya about my decision, Tanya fell into tears, and Dad became enraged. They told me I was being selfish and that Tanya should also lead me down the aisle because she had been in my life for so long. I refused, stating that my mother is my soul mother and the person I want at my side on my wedding day. This sparked a heated dispute, with Dad threatening not to attend the wedding if Tanya wasn't given a particular position. He mentioned all the times Tanya tried to be there for me, the presents she bought, the activities she planned, but to me, such things pale in contrast to my mother's unwavering love and support. Tanya blamed me for never giving her a chance and claimed that, after all these years, she considered me her own daughter. She brought up her miscarriage again, expressing how difficult it had been to lose a baby and then have her stepdaughter reject her. I understand that the miscarriage was difficult for her, but I don't think it's appropriate to use it as emotional leverage against me. I'm sticking to my decision, but now I'm wondering if I'm being too severe. Richard fully supports me, saying that it is our wedding and we should do whatever feels right to us. However, some of my extended family members believe I should make a compromise to keep the peace. Part of me feels bad for hurting Tanya's feelings. But a larger part of me is upset that Dad and Tanya are attempting to make my wedding about them. I've spent years attempting to negotiate this blended family arrangement, often at the price of my own emotions. I want my wedding day to be a celebration of love, not a battleground for old family feuds. Am I in for refusing to have my stepmother lead me down the aisle? Should I stick to my decision or seek a compromise? Update 1. It's been a month since my previous post, and a lot has changed. First and foremost, I'd want to thank everyone for their encouraging words. They greatly increased my confidence in my decision. After the wedding quarrel, my father and Tanya stopped communicating with me for a few weeks. It was a stressful situation, and I found myself continually checking my phone, half expecting and half fearing a message from them. Richard was quite helpful at this time, telling me that it was acceptable to prioritize my own sentiments, and that I was not responsible for controlling their emotions. Tanya called me unexpectedly, weeping. She apologized for pressing me throughout the years and stated that she simply wanted to be close to me. Her voice sounded truly sorry, and for a little time, I felt a ray of optimism that we might be able to go forward. She asked if we could meet for coffee to talk things over, and after some hesitation, I accepted, thinking it would be a good opportunity to clear the air before the wedding. We met in a neighborhood cafe that I used to frequent in college. It was weird to be seated across from Tanya in a setting that brought back memories of study sessions with friends and early dates with Richard. At first, everything appeared to be going well. Tanya was surprisingly sympathetic, even saying she accepted my choice to have my mother follow me down the aisle. She told my father some anecdotes about her own wedding, including how scared she was and how she wished she had a closer relationship with her stepmother. I found myself softening slightly, viewing her as a person with her own troubles and fears rather than the woman who had ended my parents' marriage. However, things took a turn when she mentioned that she and my father were thinking about renewing their vows next year. At first, I assumed she was just discussing their plans, but then she dropped a bombshell. She offered that I walk her down the aisle at their vow renewal ceremony to balance things out. This suggestion stunned me. It felt like she was attempting to establish a quid pro quo, as if my wedding and their vow renewal were somehow interchangeable. I explained that a daughter's wedding is not the same as a vow renewal. Tanya became agitated and accused me of not giving her a chance. She mentioned the miscarriage again, explaining how difficult it had been and how she had hoped that having a kid would bring our family closer together. She stated that losing the baby was especially devastating since she believed she had missed her chance to actually be a mother. I attempted to be empathetic, recalling how awful that time had been for everyone. But I also stated that her loss, while tragic, did not require me to regard her as my mother. I said that I had my own complicated thoughts at the time, feeling both sad for their loss and pleased that I would not be replaced. The conversation rapidly degenerated from there. Tanya accused me of being cold-hearted and ungrateful for everything she had attempted to do for me over time. She mentioned every gift she had ever given me and every outing she had planned, as if keeping track of her attempts at motherhood. I emphasized that genuine connection and respect for limits are what sustain relationships, not gifts and forced outings. In the heat of the moment, I uttered something I had been keeping quiet for years. I informed Tanya that while I was sad for her loss, I was tired of her using the miscarriage as emotional leverage. I said it wasn't fair to put the responsibility of her unfulfilled maternal urges on me, especially when I was only a teenager trying to deal with my own familial struggles. Tragedy. Tanya burst into tears and walked out of the cafe, leaving me sitting there, feeling guilty, angry, and relieved that I had finally spoken my actual sentiments. As I sat there, trying to digest what had just transpired, I couldn't help but think about how this cafe, which had once held wonderful memories, would now be forever connected with this awful confrontation. My father called me later that evening and raged. He claimed I had been harsh to Tanya and owed her an apology. He accused me of being selfish and ungrateful, claiming that Tanya had always wanted to love me. When I tried to explain my side of the story, he interrupted me, stating that if I couldn't accept Tanya as my mother, perhaps I shouldn't consider him my father anymore. Those remarks struck me hard. Despite our disagreements throughout the years, I never questioned that my father loved me. But in that moment, it felt like he was choosing Tanya above me, just like he had done years before when he abandoned our family for her. I am hurt and outraged, but I am also more certain than ever in my decision. Richard has been wonderfully supportive throughout this process, hugging me when I cry and assuring me that I have every right to set boundaries. We're going forward with our wedding plans, aiming to create a day that celebrates our love and the family we're starting together. My mother has also been fantastic. When I told her what had happened, she listened without judgment and offered consolation without attempting to influence my decision. She reminded me that family connections are complex and that it is acceptable to prioritize my own emotional well-being. After a few days of thought, I've decided to send my father and Tanya a farewell message. In it, I intend to express my emotions and boundaries clearly. I want to make it clear that, while I'm open to having a connection with them, it must be on terms that respect my sentiments and my relationship with my mother. I'll tell them that if they can't accept it, they won't be invited to the wedding. As I sit here writing this message, I can't help but feel a mixture of loss and relief. It isn't the relationship I hoped I could have with my father and stepmother, but it's the healthiest I can provide right now. Am I doing the right thing, or am I being overly harsh and potentially excluding them from this key day in my life? Update 2. Another month has passed, and things have only gotten more confusing. After I wrote a message to my father and Tanya describing my feelings and boundaries, I didn't hear from them for a few weeks. The silence provided both relief and anxiety. I tried to concentrate on wedding planning, finalizing the menu, having clothing fittings with my mother, and working on our vows with Richard, but the unresolved problem with my father and Tanya remained in the back of my mind. Then, last Saturday, my father arrived at my flat unannounced. I was in the process of addressing invitations with Richard when the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see my father standing there, fatigued and upset. I invited him in, more by surprise than anything else. Richard, sensing the tension, excused himself to give us some peace, but not before gently caressing my hand. When we were alone, Dad broke down. He informed me that Tanya had left him. Tanya apparently had a breakdown following our disagreement at the coffee shop and my message. She informed my father she couldn't take the rejection any longer and needed to find herself. She packed her luggage and left to reside with her sister in another state. As I listened to my father pour out his heart, I was overcome with emotion. Part of me felt justified. Hadn't I been warning Tanya for years that her relationship with me was unhealthy? But another part of me felt guilty. Had my inability to accept her as a mother figure truly caused so much pain? Dad was a mess, alternately apologizing to me and blaming me for Tanya's departure. He explained that he didn't know how to solve things and asked if I would try family therapy with him and Tanya. The concept made me uncomfortable. I told him I wasn't prepared for that, especially since Tanya had left him, and I wasn't sure where we all stood. Then, my father revealed another bombshell. He admitted that years ago, when Tanya miscarried, they had been trying for a baby because Tanya believed it would help me accept her as a mother figure. He admitted that they were wrong to try to replace me or push a mother-daughter bond. This information surprised me. It explained a lot about their behavior over the years, including the increased pressure to bond with Tanya, the continuous comparisons to a real family, and the guilt-tripping following the miscarriage. However, it also made me angry. I felt manipulated, like my feelings had been ignored in their effort to build their ideal family. I told my father I needed time to comprehend everything and begged him to go. I was overwhelmed. As I closed the door behind him, I contacted my mom because I needed her calm presence and smart guidance. She listened attentively as I explained everything, then suggested that I take some time to seriously consider what I want my relationship with my father and Tanya to look like in the future. Now, I'm feeling conflicted. On the one hand, I feel vindicated in my decision to maintain boundaries with Tanya. Her leaving my father appears to demonstrate that her attachment to me was motivated more by her selfish desires than real concern for me. On the other hand, I feel horrible for my father, who appears truly sorry and bewildered. Richard believes I should keep my boundaries but be open to repairing a connection with my father over time. He pointed out that while my father's confession regarding the pregnancy attempt was hard to hear, it was also a step forward in honesty that we had not experienced previously. My mother, when I told her what had transpired, was surprisingly sympathetic to my father. She believes that when individuals are thirsty for affection and acceptance, they can make serious blunders. She reminded me of how young my father was when they had me and how he may have been attempting to recreate the family life he believed he had lost. The wedding is now only a month away, and I'm not sure what to do about my father's invitation. Should I still invite him, giving him the opportunity to be a part of this special day? Should I contact Tanya now that I understand her motivations? Should I focus on my own happiness while they deal with their problems? As I sit here staring at the stack of unsent invites, I understand that this decision is about more than just the wedding. It's about the future relationship I desire with my father and whether Tanya has a role in my life. It's about striking a balance between compassion and self-protection, as well as determining what forgiveness looks like in a circumstance where the wounds are deep. Update 3. The wedding was last. Update 3. The wedding was last weekend, and I wanted to provide a last update on how everything worked out. After considerable thought and several long conversations with Richard and my mother, I decided to keep my father's invitation to the wedding open, but I made it plain that it was only for him and not for Tanya. I sent him a long email explaining my decision. I informed him that I was willing to work on our relationship, but it would take time and that he needed to respect my boundaries. I also conveyed my wish that he would attend the wedding to celebrate this special day in my life, but I understood if he felt unable to attend without Tanya. To my amazement, my father accepted these terms. He responded to my email, again apologizing for everything and expressing his want to be present on my wedding day. He also stated that he and Tanya were still separated and that he was beginning to see how much their relationship had influenced me over the years. Last-minute preparations dominated the week leading up to the wedding. My mother was an unwavering source of support, assisting with everything from floral arrangements to easing my pre-wedding nerves. Richard's family visited from out of town, and witnessing how well they got along with my mother made me happy for the loving, drama-free family I would marry into. On the wedding day, I was a ball of nervousness and excitement. As my mother helped me into my dress, we both shed tears as she told me how proud she was of the lady I'd become, and how glad she was that Richard and I had met. It was a memory I'll keep forever. The ceremony was amazing. Walking down the aisle with my mother by my side felt just beautiful. I noticed my father seated in one of the front rows, appearing distraught yet smiling when our gazes met. Richard's reaction when he saw me go down the aisle was all I had hoped for and more. During the reception, I was busy welcoming visitors and enjoying the festivities with Richard, but I noticed my father looking sad and lonely at moments. He put on a brave face whenever he noticed me gazing. To my amazement, he had a cordial chat with my mother at one point. They were never going to be friends, but the fact that they could be in the same room without causing tension was a relief. After the wedding, after things had settled down a little, my father and I had a long conversation. He apologized once more for everything and promised to. He promised to try harder to be a good father. He recognized that he had made numerous mistakes, particularly in attempting to force a connection between Tanya and myself. He also informed me that Tanya had decided to stay with her sister indefinitely, and they were discussing a trial separation. I'm cautiously enthusiastic about mending my relationship with my father. We've decided to start with monthly dinners for just the two of us to reconnect without pressure. It won't be easy, and there will be a lot of pain to deal with, but I'm willing to try. I chose not to contact Tanya right now. I believe we both require time and space to recover and move forward. Maybe, eventually, we'll be able to talk about everything that happened, but for now, I'm focused on my new life with Richard and mending my relationship with my father. This entire experience has been a roller coaster, but I'm glad I held my ground. I'm starting my married life with a better awareness of my family dynamics and more firm limits. The wedding proved to be more than simply a celebration of my love for Richard. It also marked a fresh beginning in my relationship with my parents. Richard and I are finally settling into married life, and it feels great to face the future together, knowing we can deal with anything that comes our way. We are planning a belated honeymoon to Japan next month, which we are both looking forward to. Thank you to everyone who helped me on this journey. Your guidance and encouragement helped me get through this terrible situation and begin this new chapter in my life on a positive note. It won't be easy, and there will be a lot of pain to deal with, but I'm willing to try. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. My family always relied on me financially, but when I stopped helping, they turned me into the villain. After years of supporting my family, I was expelled and accused of being selfish. There have been other occasions over the years when I felt ignored, such as birthdays when Mark would receive the pricey presents while I received something useful like new socks or a coat, or vacations when his family had all the attention while I sat quietly on the sidelines. It didn't matter, I told myself. I assumed that was just the nature of parents. In addition, I had always been self-sufficient. I didn't require the attention or the hype. Things changed even further once Mark married Becky and had his first son, Jason. Mark was suddenly more than simply the favorite. He was the one who brought us grandchildren. Now that they could proudly call themselves grandparents, my parents were ecstatic, feeling as though their lives had been completed. Though I couldn't help but feel a little invisible in my own family, I was also pleased for him. I dismissed it, though, since family helps family, as I've always told myself. This is where it all began to go south. Mark lost his job at the conclusion of the previous year. His business was among the first to close when the small retail chain he worked for began shutting its sights. It was awful. I was genuinely sorry for him. I recall Becky sobbing when she called my parents, concerned about how they would make ends meet on her meager part-time bakery salary. They were devastated to lose Mark's paycheck since, shocking as it may seem, he wasn't the best with money. However, my parents' solution was to ask him, Becky, and their 2 children to move in with them rather than helping him come up with a practical strategy to get back on his feet. It may seem acceptable on paper. Family stays together through difficult times, and they have room. The space they so kindly offered was mine. And that was the problem. It took place on a Sunday evening. I had just returned from a lengthy work trip, fatigued, and all I wanted was a bed and a shower. I sensed something was wrong the moment I went through the door. At the kitchen table, my parents were waiting for me. Dad was silent as usual, tinkering with his watch, and Mom had her typical worried expression. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk," Mom remarked suddenly, tense. I sat down after dropping my bag beside the door. Mother didn't mince words. "You know how hard things have been for your brother since he lost his job. He's got Becky and the kids to worry about, and they really don't have anywhere else to go." My heart sank. I could already see where this was going. Even though I knew the answer before I spoke, I nevertheless inquired, "So where are they going to stay?" Mom's smile was as if she had practiced it 100 times. "The basement suite is perfect for them. It's separate from the main house, so they'll have their privacy. Becky and the kids will be comfortable there." I glanced at her, attempting to take it all in. "Wait. My basement suite? Where am I supposed to go?" Dad spoke up at last, although in a hushed tone. "We've set up the hobby room for you. It's cozy. You'll have plenty of space." What I was hearing was unbelievable. Glorified closet, the hobby room. It housed Mom's sewing machine, containers of seasonal decorations, half-finished projects, and stacks of fabric. It wasn't a bedroom at all. In the hopes that this was some strange prank, I asked, "You're kidding, right?" Mom became defensive in her tone. "It's only temporary, Sarah. Besides, this is our house, and we need to make decisions that benefit the family as a whole. You'll be fine in the hobby room for now." It was the old-fashioned statement. "It's our house." I sat there in startled silence as the talk came to a close and my parents congratulated themselves on their generosity and helpfulness. I was not a big arguer. What was the purpose? I didn't like it, but Mark was moving in. Neither my comfort nor my space mattered. That evening, I packed up my laptop, clothes, and toiletries. I gazed at my tiny suite in the basement, which I had turned into my home in recent years. It was mine. Even though it wasn't flawless, I had my favorite scented candles, comfortable blankets on the couch, and bookshelves full of literature. It was all being torn away from me now to make room for Mark and his family. They didn't even ask, which was the worst part. It was determined for me, as if my opinions were completely irrelevant. There was no discussion, no family gathering, and no, "Sarah, how do you feel about this?" Not in the hobby room. Not in a house where I was obviously only a supporting part in someone else's story. I knew by the next morning that I couldn't stay. I therefore devised a strategy. I reserved a reasonably priced all-inclusive resort in the Florida Keys for the 2 weeks I had off in between job trips. It wasn't elegant, but it was less expensive than buying food and paying $1,600 for a property I no longer even lived in. It also included calm and tranquility, 2 things I really needed. My parents seemed uninterested in my plan when I informed them about it. The actual turmoil didn't start until I left. Even though Mom responded, "Well, if that's what you need to do," my phone buzzed 2 days into my vacation at the resort. It was Mom's message. "Mom, hey Sarah, where's the money for rent and groceries this month? We're counting on it to help support Mark and the kids." Speechless, I gazed at the letter. She couldn't be serious, surely. When I gave her a call back, we had a conversation that went something like this. "Me. Mom, I don't live there anymore. Why would I pay rent? Mom, because we're still a family, Sarah. You know we're all in a bind right now, and Mark needs that space more than you do. Me. But you gave away my space. I'm not even there. At that point, Dad called, his voice firmer than normal. Dad, you can't just leave your family hanging like this. We raised you better than that. Talking to a wall was like that. They insisted on the same thing no matter what I said. I was self-centered. I was leaving my family behind. I also had a responsibility to Mark's troubles. Then Mark called and added his voice. Mark, Sarah, you don't understand. I have a family to take care of. You don't need the space like we do. I lost my temper. Me. Mark, when you had your job, did you ever send Mom and Dad money to help out? Silence. Me. No. You spent it all on yourself. So why am I supposed to bail you out now? That temporarily silenced him. I was trembling with rage by the time the call was over. I had been the one keeping everything together for years, taking care of my parents, making the payments, and being the responsible one. For what purpose? To be ejected from my personal space and accused of selfishness for standing my ground? I came to a realization at that point. This was no longer about supporting my family, it has to do with control. They betrayed me after I declined to play a part they had never asked me to play. Out of guilt, I sent Mom $400 for food, but that was all. I would no longer continue to support their lives at the price of myself. I was unaware at the time that this was only the beginning. The whole family would be rocked by my determination to defend myself, and I would never have encountered such a strong reaction. After I refused to continue paying for a place I no longer occupied, things quickly fell apart. I had no idea how far my parents and the rest of my family would go to keep me in line, even if I felt the guilt trip during that initial phone call was awful. The Florida Keys all-inclusive resort was meant to be my haven, a place where I could relax and get my mind straight. I wasn't spending $1,600 a month in a basement suite from which I had been evicted. For once, everything I needed was there in the small bungalow I rented: good meals, a view of the pool, and most importantly, tranquility. It was like a taste of freedom, something I had been longing for but had not even understood. However, that tranquility was short-lived. My phone was constantly buzzing with missed calls and texts. On the third day of my visit, Mom, Sarah, we're disappointed in you. This isn't what family does. Dad, it's not fair to leave us hanging like this. Are you only concerned with yourself? Mark, every communication was like a kick to the gut. It was obvious that Mark had joined my parents' campaign to wear me down since they were unrelenting. At first, I didn't respond to any of them. The text continued despite my assurances that I needed time and that they would ultimately stop bothering me. Then came the phone calls. Out of pure exasperation, I picked up once, only to hear Mark's voice on the other end. His tone was accusatory, as if he had practiced the question. Mark, you know what you're doing to Mom and Dad, right? They're struggling. The house is too expensive, and now they're trying to help me and my family. You're making it worse by leaving. I don't get how you can be so selfish. What I was hearing was unbelievable. Me? Selfish? I asked again, attempting to remain composed. You took my space, Mark. I'm not even living there anymore. Why would I keep paying for something I don't have? Mark, it's not about space, Sarah. It's about family. I have kids to think about, and you don't. You should be helping out more, not running away. His daring was astounding. Here was my brother, who had mismanaged his finances for years, telling me that I owed him money to support his children. I ended the call. At the time, that was the only answer I could come up with. I was beginning to feel like I couldn't get out. At the end of the week, even though my parents lived in Riverside, 1,000 miles away, their comments followed me everywhere. There was a new message waiting for me each time I looked at my phone. The tone fluctuated, at times expressing rage, guilt, or an odd mix of the two. Mom. Sarah, think of Jason and the kids. They're just little boys. Do you really want them to suffer because you're being stubborn? Dad. You owe it to us. We took care of you when you were younger. Now it's your turn. Mark. You'll regret this when the kids remember how their aunt turned her back on them. Nor were the texts the only thing. My extended family became interested. I began receiving calls from relatives I hardly knew, Uncle Gary, Aunt Linda, and others I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunt Linda. Sarah, honey, she said on a single call. I'm sure you don't mean to upset your parents like this. They've done so much for you. Can't you just help a little longer? Mark really needs it right now. I felt like screaming bitterly. I thought, a little longer? What was the slightly longer duration? 1 more month? A year? Forever? I had been paying more than my fair share for years, but nobody seemed to care. The day following my return from the Keys was the last straw. I was in the middle of unpacking when my little Columbus apartment was knocked on. My parents were standing there when I opened it. With a heavy folder gripped in her hands, Mom appeared worn out but resolute. Although his presence loomed like a silent threat, Dad remained mute as usual. Stunned, I said, Mom? Dad? What are you doing here? Mom exclaimed, We need to talk, as she walked into the living room, sweeping by me. I was forced to let them in after Dad pursued her, as if they owned the place. They took a seat on my couch. Mom began laying out documents on the coffee table. After opening the folder, I knew right away what they were: supermarket receipts, repair estimates, and utility bills. Mom. Sarah, she said, we can't do this without you. Look at these expenses. The mortgage is still due, the roof needs repairs before winter, and Mark's kids need school supplies. We need your help. Stunned, I gazed at her. Me. I'm not living there anymore. Why should I pay for any of this? Dad yelled. Because you're part of this family. At last, family sticks together when times are tough. You don't just run off because things get hard. I could feel my anger erupting. Me. You didn't ask me, Dad. You didn't ask how I felt about giving up my space. You just decided for me, and now you want me to keep paying for it? That's insane. Even if Mom's tone softened, the manipulation was obvious. Mom. Honey, think of Jason and Liam. They don't understand why their aunt isn't helping. We just want to keep this family together. For me, that was the turning point. This had nothing to do with groceries, the mortgage, or even Mark's children. Control was at issue here. I was always supposed to be the good girl, the responsible daughter who would keep everything running smoothly, according to my parents. And they had no idea how to respond now that I wasn't complying. I got up and gestured to the door. Me. I think you should go. Mom's eyes got big. Mom. Sarah, no. I cut in. Me. I'm serious. You need to go. Dad appeared truly astonished for the first time. They never expected me to resist. I believe, Mom remarked. We were just trying to do what's best for the family. As they walked slowly to the door, I didn't answer. I locked the door after they had left. Then I sat trembling on the couch, my family's expectations, my personal wants, the years I'd spent being the good daughter, and the covert sacrifice of my financial independence so they could live comfortably were all on my mind. As I lay awake that night, I realized then that I had been facilitating this scenario for years. They became reliant on me as soon as I began making money. They expected more from me the more I contributed. Mark's poor life management was not my fault, and I had no obligation to correct it. However, liberation was not going to be simple. I told my parents to back off, but they weren't going to do it. I would have to battle for my life if I wanted it back. At that point, I decided I would continue to assist them when I could, but I would no longer allow them to dictate how I behaved. If I didn't live in the house, I wouldn't pay for it. I wouldn't feel bad about refusing to pay Mark's mortgage or his children's school supplies. I texted Mom one final time the following morning. I can't continue to pay for everything. Even though I love you, I'm not an ATM. But I'll assist when I can. Please be mindful of that. In less than an hour, the response was received. Mom, I can't believe you're doing this to us, Sarah. We're family. I didn't respond. I felt like I was regaining control of my life for the first time in years. I foolishly believed that I had seen the worst of it, that perhaps, just perhaps, they would give me some breathing room after my parents' surprise visit and the onslaught of guilt-tripping texts. I was mistaken. In my family, it turns out that advocating for yourself is the same as declaring war. It creates a full-fledged tsunami rather than simply a ripple. The next stage of this conflict was a virtual family gathering, where everyone with a phone and an opinion had a front-row ticket to my crucifixion. In typical Evans family manner, an email was the first step. Mom, Sarah, we've scheduled a family meeting for this Sunday at 3 p.m. It's important. Your aunts, uncles, and cousins will be there. Please don't miss it. Of all the passive-aggressive things I had ever read, that please was it. A meeting with the entire family? It was unbelievable to me. Was it really their intention to humiliate me by gathering the whole extended family? Did they believe that I might be fixed in some way by a mass ambush? I nearly forgot to log in. I considered completely disregarding it and letting them all shout into space, but I knew deep down that doing so would only serve to strengthen their story. Sarah's avoiding us because she knows she's wrong. I therefore set an alarm for 2:55 p.m., with a terrible feeling in my stomach, and joined the video conference. My parents, Brother Mark, Aunt Linda, Uncle Gary, Cousin Rachel, and a few more relatives, who only ever showed up at weddings and Christmas dinners, were all present when the screen loaded. I glanced at the squares on the screen, and I could tell from the reticent looks that I was going to be put to death. The first person to speak was Mom, and she wasted no time in doing so. Her voice was filled with fake concern, as if I were a lost child rather than an adult who dared to put herself first. Mom, Sarah, we're all here because we're concerned about you and the decisions you've been making lately. I remained quiet as they planned their speech. The next 30 minutes were a haze of guilt-tripping and accusations from all sides of the screen. Aunt Linda, Sarah, we're all family here. You can't just turn your back when people are struggling. Mark and the kids need support right now. We all pitch in when times are tough. Uncle Gary, your parents have done everything for you. Now, when it's your turn to step up, you're acting like it's too much to ask. Family comes first. And Rachel, I want to be independent, but you don't just cut off your family. That's not how we were raised. Naturally, Mark then added his voice. Mark, do you know how hard it is for Becky and me right now? The kids don't understand why their aunt suddenly doesn't care about them. Jason asked me the other day why you don't want to see them anymore. What am I supposed to tell him? It was a powerful blow, although I adore my nephews. Mark was well aware of his actions. He was using them as a weapon against me, manipulating the circumstances to paint me as a cold-blooded monster. After what seemed like hours, they finally gave me the opportunity to speak. Despite my trembling palms, I inhaled deeply and unmuted myself. Look, I remarked, attempting to maintain a steady tone. I love this family, I do. And I've been helping for years, paying rent, paying for groceries, doing whatever I could to keep things running. But this is too much. Mom's expression tightened, but I persisted. I'm not living at home anymore. You gave my space away without even asking me, and now you're expecting me to keep paying for it. That's not fair. You're all acting like I'm abandoning you, but I'm just trying to take care of myself for once. There was silence in the room. I wasn't done yet, but I could see Mom shaking her head and getting ready to respond. "Mark," I uttered while looking straight at his video square. "You're my brother, and I care about you. But you've never been responsible with your money. When you had a job, did you send money to Mom and Dad to help out? No, you spend it on yourself. And now, when you're in trouble, suddenly I'm the bad guy for not bailing you out?" Despite his hot face, Mark remained silent. I added, "And the rest of you?" as I turned to face my extended family. "Where were you when I was the one keeping everything afloat? None of you had anything to say when I was paying $1,600 a month for a basement suite I only lived in half the time. But the second I draw a boundary, suddenly I'm selfish?" The ensuing hush was deafening. Uncle Gary was frowning. Aunt Linda was scandalized. And my mother was about to cry. Dad refused to look into my eyes as he sat there with his arms folded. Mom finally said something. "Sarah, we just don't understand why you're acting like this. This isn't like you." That was it. The last straw. I didn't wait for an answer before saying, "This is me, Mom. I'm just not the doormat you've gotten used to." With a gratifying thump, I closed my laptop after selecting Leave Meeting. The text began right away. "Mother, you didn't have to humiliate us like that, Sarah. We were trying to have a conversation. Mark, you've changed. I hope you're happy leaving your family behind. Aunt Linda, I can't believe how disrespectful you were to your parents." I disregarded them all. I no longer owed them an explanation. But despite my sense of justification, I was powerless to stop the guilt from eating at me. I had always been the good girl, the responsible daughter who never got into trouble growing up. It felt strange to stand up for myself, like I were violating some holy family law. I sat with a glass of wine on my couch that evening and tried to take it all in. I became increasingly aware that this was about more than just money and space. As I gave it more attention, I realized it had to do with control. My family had depended on me for years, thinking I would always be compliant. They turned against me as soon as I left that position. I have no regrets about my remarks throughout the meeting. It was the first honest thing I had said to them in years. If anything, I was aware that the worst was yet to come. My family was not going to silently give up. They had only barely begun. I hoped things would settle down after the family gathering. Perhaps I was naive, but I believed that perhaps the surprise of my at last defending myself would cause them to back off, give me room, give themselves time to think. I was mistaken. My refusal to back down simply made things more heated. If anything, I felt as though I had prodded the bear, and it was now using all of its strength to claw back. Boundaries were not something my family respected. They viewed them as obstacles to be surmounted. The attempts to pull me back into the fold were blatantly intrusive, the manipulation became more daring, and the guilt trips became more acute. It took place a few days following the family gathering. My coworker, Sam, stopped by my office as I was finishing up a customer report. "Hey, Sarah, some woman called reception asking for you and said she was your mom. She left a message with Emily, but I think you should hear." I felt sick to my stomach. Emily gave me a sticky note while wearing a perplexed expression, and I followed him to reception. The message said, "This is Sarah's mother, Nancy Evans. We're going through a difficult moment, and I need to talk to her about some pressing family issues that may be interfering with her ability to concentrate at work. Please urge her to take the initiative. Thank you." I froze, looking at the message as if it were about to burn in my palms. My mother had contacted my place of employment. My workplace. Not to see how I was doing, nor because of an emergency, but to leave a note implying that I wasn't doing my share to support the family. I was embarrassed. Enraged. I crumpled up the message, my face burning. Sam smiled awkwardly at me. Everything okay?" I gave a rigid nod. "Yeah, it's fine. Just family stuff." However, it wasn't good. As soon as I got home that night, I called my mother. "Why would you call my work, Mom? That's completely out of line." She sounded angry, wry, as if I were the one who was being unfair. "I had to get your attention somehow. You're not listening to us, Sarah. Maybe hearing it from someone at work will help you see how serious this is." What I was hearing was unbelievable. "My work has nothing to do with you, or Mark, or your bills. You can't drag my professional life into this." Mom didn't think twice. "We're your family. We come first. You need to start acting like it." "No," I firmly answered. "I don't. I need you to respect my boundaries, and I need you to leave my job out of this." "Limits?" She laughed. "This isn't about boundaries, Sarah. This is about family loyalty. You're abandoning us, and you don't even see it." I ended the call. Arguments were pointless. Nothing I said would convince my mother to change her story because she was so engrossed in it. When I woke up the following day, I was inundated with alerts. I knew who it was without even looking at my phone. My brother, Mark, had indeed made a Facebook post. His initial post was ambiguous, just enough to evoke pity without providing specifics. Mark Evans. "You discover your true family during difficult times, when it's inconvenient for them. Some people lose track of their origins. Even though we're trying our hardest, it's difficult when some folks refuse to help." The comments came flooding in. "Mark, keep going. You're capable. Family is the most important thing. One day, whoever is disappointing you will come to repent it. Toxic people are not necessary in your life. Pay attention to your lovely family." But the best part was when Mark himself sent out a direct message. "Mark, Jason is constantly inquiring as to why you no longer come. Are you okay with me telling him that his aunt doesn't give a damn about him?" I sat there looking at my phone, feeling both angry and sad. Knowing how much I loved Mark's children, I detested the way he used them as a weapon against me. However, I was also aware that this was typical Mark behavior: play the victim, elicit pity, and paint me as the bad guy. I declined to respond. I refused to play his game. My parents were bound to try something different eventually. It was to be anticipated. I was enjoying some rare quiet time that Saturday morning while drinking coffee when someone knocked on my door. As I looked through the peephole, my heart fell. There they were, Dad and Mom, standing on my porch, Mom holding a manila envelope. I contemplated not responding. I knew they wouldn't go, but I might have acted as though I wasn't home. I inhaled deeply before opening the door. "What are you doing here?" I said. Without even waiting for an invitation, Mom took action. Dad followed her as she pushed past me as though they owned the place. They took a seat on my couch, and Mom took out the folder. "We need to talk about finances," she continued, laying out receipts and bills on my coffee table. I gave my temples a rub. "Mom, we've been through this. I'm not paying for a house I don't live in anymore." With a stern voice, Dad said, "Sarah, you don't understand. We're struggling. Mark's struggling. The roof needs to be fixed before winter, and there are school fees for Jason and Liam. It's not just about you." I exploded. "It's always about me, Dad. It's about what I can give, what I can pay for, what sacrifices I can make to keep everyone else comfortable. Well, I'm done. I'm not your ATM, and I'm not responsible for Mark's problems. We're not asking for much, Sarah. Just $2,000 a month to help with the basics. Is that really so unreasonable?" Mom shot back, her voice cracking. Stunned, I gazed at her. "You think $2,000 a month is not much? Are you hearing yourself right now?" From there, the discussion took a turn for the worse. They always responded with blame and guilt whenever I attempted to defend my position. "After everything we've done for you! Family is supposed to help each other. Mark has kids to think about, Sarah. You don't understand because you're single." I had finally had enough. I got up and gestured toward the door. You need to leave. Mom looked at me as if I had given her a slap. Sarah. They gathered their belongings and departed, slamming the door behind them. But Dad murmured something under his breath. Now I collapsed onto the couch once they were gone, feeling as though I had just finished a marathon. My chest felt constricted, and my head was thumping. I kept thinking about the dispute, my dad's disappointment, my mom's tears, and how I felt like I was failing them. But I knew in my heart that I wasn't. I was simply worn out. I'm sick of having to make repairs all the time. I'm fed up with being the good daughter who gave up everything for different people. I was in a trance for the remainder of the day. Oscillating between melancholy and anger, I was starting to feel the effects of the pressure, guilt, and relentless manipulation. I understood for the first time that this was more than a passing dispute. Unless I broke it, this loop would continue indefinitely. I vowed to myself as I lay in bed that night, I would not allow them to pull me back in. I would not back down, no matter how much they tried to guilt me or how hard they pushed me. Stopping being their crutch was something I owed to myself. But they weren't finished yet, as I would soon discover. By no means. Upon my parents' unexpected arrival and their ridiculous demand for $2,000 per month, I believed I had seen every trick in the book. I believed I was at last ready for their guilt trips and emotional blackmail. I convinced myself that if I stood my ground, they would back off. Those who thrive on control, however, have a tendency to persevere. They get more intense. The following week felt like a pressure cooker. In little time at all, my parents quickly spread the word about their egotistical daughter leaving them when they needed her most. It wasn't until I began receiving calls and texts from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years that I realized how far they had gone. First, it was my Uncle Gary once more, who always managed to keep the peace in the family. Uncle Gary. Sarah, your mom called me crying. She's heartbroken about everything that's happening. I get that you're upset, but can't you just compromise a little? Family is more important than pride. I tightened my jaw as I gazed at my phone. How did pride enter into this? Was it prideful to spend half the month living out of a suitcase and not want to pay someone else's mortgage? My cousin Rachel, who enjoys pushing her nose where it doesn't belong, then sent me a note. Rachel, I don't mean to be impolite, but this is a little ridiculous. Are you simply allowing your brother and his children to suffer? Sarah, it's chilly. I didn't believe you were that way. Whatever the truth, my parents had created their own version of events, making me the bad guy. The one who had deserted her family. The one who was more concerned with money than her sad brother and his helpless kids. And they made me the black sheep overnight. And it worked. Naturally, my brother Mark seized the opportunity to stoke the fires, posting more frequently and sharply on social media. Some people say they care about family, but when times get tough, they're nowhere to be found, Mark wrote on Facebook. Even if it means bearing this burden alone, I'll stop at nothing to ensure my children are happy. My phone buzzed with a notice from a group chat that my cousins and I were sharing, and I chose to ignore it, until Rachel shared a screenshot of Mark's most recent message, adding, "Yikes, he's talking about you, isn't he?" His friends and random acquaintances flooded the comments with sympathy and encouragement. But no one knew the truth. And Mark didn't care. The humiliation was unbearable to me. Mark knew exactly what he was doing, portraying himself as the father who never gives up, the struggling hero, and me as the cold-hearted, self-centered sister who refused to help. My mother crossed another line just when I thought things couldn't get any worse. On Tuesday morning, I was in the middle of a conference call when my employer, Tom, knocked on my office door. Tom was uneasy. "May I speak with you for a moment, Sarah?" Dread gripped my gut as I nodded and muted my phone. Tom shut the door behind him and took a seat across from me. "Your mom called the office again," he added with care. "She didn't speak to me directly, but she left a message with reception." my face flushed with shame. I'm really sorry. I'll take care of it. It's okay, Tom said, raising his hand. Family matters come up. I wanted to make sure that everything was well. Please let me know if you require time off for whatever reason. I answered sharply. There's nothing going on. And I detested the fact that my mother had brought my work life into her mess. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again, I continued. My work was the one place I'd managed to keep apart from my family's craziness, and now she was invading it too. Tom nodded and walked away. But the damage was done. I felt ashamed and remained at my desk for a long time, staring blankly at my computer screen. How did she? My parents were trying harder. My brother was using his children as weapons, and the rest of the family had taken sides. By the end of the week, I was emotionally spent. The texts, phone calls, and gossip felt unrelenting, and I couldn't go a day without someone attempting to manipulate or guilt-trip me back into submission. I had just finished cleaning my apartment on a Saturday afternoon when I heard a knock on the door. I knew immediately who it was without even looking through the peephole, so I opened it to find Mark standing there with his arms crossed and a frown on his face. This was the last straw. "What are you doing here, Mark?" I inquired. He didn't waste time making small talk. "Sarah, we must speak. This has continued for too long." I stopped in the doorway by crossing my arms. "No, Mark. There's no need for conversation. You must go." He raised his voice and screamed. "You don't get to just walk away from your family." Jason and Liam couldn't comprehend why their aunt no longer cared about them. "Mom and Dad are losing their hearts because of you. You're shattering mine." Something broke inside of me. "I'm not the one who left, Mark. You did that because you believed that I owed you something simply because I put in more effort and made wiser decisions, and that I should clean up your mess. I'm finished carrying you." For once, Mark had no rebuttal and appeared astonished, as if no one had ever spoken to him in that manner. "Go home, Mark," I murmured softly. "Nurse your own family. I'm finished." When I heard his footsteps departing, I felt a wave of tiredness slam over me. I stood there, trembling for a second, half expecting him to knock again or yell through the door. But he didn't. My family wasn't just requesting assistance. They felt entitled to it, my money, my time, my life. And when I dared to refuse, they made it their mission to punish me for it. I sat on my couch that night and stared at the wall, thinking about everything that had happened over the past few months, including the eviction from my basement suite, the incessant guilt trips, the invasion of my workplace, and the lies Mark spread online. At that moment, I understood that I had two options. I could either walk away from this losing war or continue to fight it. One of the few people who had supported me during this ordeal was my buddy, Jessica, whom I called the following morning. "Jess, I'm moving," I declared. "Where are you moving?" "I'm not sure yet. Outside the state. A long way off. I require a new beginning." I put the pieces in motion over the course of the following 2 weeks, applying for a job transfer within my organization and beginning my search for apartments in Charlotte, North Carolina, a city I had always wanted to visit because it was close enough to provide me with space without making me feel like I was running away. I placed a brief letter on the kitchen table at my previous residence on the day I packed up my car and left Columbus, but I kept it a secret from both Mark and my parents. "I can't continue living this way. Even though I love you, one day I hope you'll understand." I don't know if they ever will. As I drove down the highway toward Charlotte, I experienced a strange range of emotions, including relief, anger for the way my family treated me, and grief for the family I had to leave behind. For the first time in years I felt free from obligations that weren't mine, free from guilt, and free to start over. The kilometers behind me made it clear to me that I was choosing myself, and for once, that was sufficient. Rather than fleeing. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.